This is Crazy Karen HOA. It started small and turned ugly. I am standing on my front lawn in Charlotte, North Carolina, at 7:43 on a Thursday night in mid-December, and Heather Jackson is screaming at me to turn off my holiday lights right now or she is calling the police. She is the architectural review chair for the Willowbrook Estates Association. She is holding a laminated holiday display checklist against her maroon vest like a shield. And she is telling me my music sync setup is a noise violation. I have the application receipts in my truck. I submitted photos 3 weeks ago. She approved them herself. But she is standing here in my driveway, pointing at my roof, telling me I did not get an exception and I am lowering property values. I moved to Willowbrook because I wanted amenities and a clean, orderly community. I am a contractor estimator. I know how to follow rules, I know how to read blueprints, and I know how to document everything. And I documented everything with this HOA. Because this is a place where curb appeal is treated like a moral issue, and every mailbox has to match, and every front door color has to be pre-approved. Heather is jabbing her finger at my synchronized RGB light strips, the ones running along my roofline in perfect straight lines, and she is saying the music sync controller is generating noise complaints. I ask her who complained. She says that is confidential. I ask her what noise. Because the controller is inside my garage and it does not make sound. She says stop arguing. That is her thing. Stop arguing. She says it every time someone asks a question. I pull out my phone and I show her the email confirmation from November 18th. Subject line: Application approved. Willowbrook Estates holiday display. She glances at it for half a second, and she says that approval was conditional, and I violated the conditions. I ask what conditions. She taps the laminated checklist and says noise restrictions and safety code, and I should have known better. I point out that the lights are on a timer, they shut off at 10, and the music sync is visual only because the controller does not have external speakers. She says she has reports of disturbances, and the board is required to investigate. I ask to see the reports. She says, that is confidential. Stop arguing. My chest is tight. I cannot afford surprise fees. I have a mortgage, and I have truck payments, and I am not paying HOA attorney bills because someone decided to rewrite the rules after I followed them. That is what is at stake here. My peace of mind. I cannot afford to lose sleep over this, and I cannot afford to get blindsided by legal threats over Christmas lights. Heather turns and walks back to her white sedan parked at the curb. She opens the door and she pulls out a manila folder. She walks back up my driveway and she hands me a single-page letter. Compliance notice. It says, I have 72 hours to resubmit photos for approval before the weekend, or I will be subject to daily fines of $50. It says my current display does not meet the safety and aesthetic standards of the community, and it references Section 4.7 of the covenants. I read Section 4.7 last month. It says decorations must be tasteful and temporary and must not create hazards. My lights are LED. They are on a timer. They are stapled to fascia boards with insulated clips. I use the same system I spec for commercial jobs. Heather is staring at me, waiting for me to fold. I look up and I say I will resubmit the photos, but I want to know what specifically is non-compliant. She says that is not compliant. You do not get an exception. I say I am not asking for an exception. I am asking what is wrong. She says the music sync setup. I say it is inside my garage. She says the board received complaints. I say show me the complaints. She says, stop arguing. I take a photo of the notice with my phone. I take a photo of Heather standing in my driveway holding the laminated checklist. She sees me doing it, and she says recording board members during enforcement actions is harassment. I say I am documenting the interaction. She says she is going to note that in her report. She gets back in her car and she drives off. I stand there in my driveway under my synchronized lights, which are flashing red and green in a slow chase pattern, and I feel my jaw clenching. I go inside and I pull up the HOA portal on my laptop. I log in and I check my application history. November 18th. Approved with no conditions. I screenshot it. I open my email and I search for Heather Jackson. I find 6 messages. 3 are approvals for other requests. 2 are reminders about annual meetings. 1 is from December 9th, 4 days ago, and it is a forward of a complaint. The complaint is anonymous. It says a resident on Maple Ridge Court is operating a light display that creates visual disturbance and possible electrical hazards. Maple Ridge Court is my street. I live at 412 Maple Ridge Court. The complaint does not mention music sync. It does not mention noise. It mentions visual disturbance and electrical hazards. I call my buddy Derek. Derek is a former board member. He resigned last year after he got tired of the micromanagement and the constant rule changes. He tells me Heather has been gunning for anyone who pushes back on approvals. He says she has a habit of approving things and then reversing them after the fact if someone complains. He says the board lets her do it because she volunteers for everything and nobody else wants the job. He asks me what I am going to do. I say I am going to resubmit the photos, and I am going to include a letter citing the original approval and the lack of specific violations. He laughs and he says good luck, but he tells me to keep every email and every notice because Heather has a history of changing her story. I thank him, and I hang up. I spend the next hour taking detailed photos of my display. I photograph every light strip. I photograph the controller in the garage with the door open, so you can see it is not connected to external speakers. I photograph the extension cords which are outdoor rated and plugged into GFCI outlets. I photograph the timer settings on my phone app. I write a 2-page letter explaining that the display was approved on November 18th with no conditions, that I have complied with all safety codes, and that I am requesting clarification on what specific aspect of the display is non-compliant. I submit the package through the portal on Friday morning. I get an auto reply saying the Architectural Review Committee will respond within 5 business days. 5 business days puts me past the 72-hour deadline. I send a follow-up email to Heather directly. I say I have submitted the requested photos and documentation, and I am asking for an extension on the deadline until the committee has time to review. She replies 6 minutes later. She says the deadline stands, and failure to comply will result in fines and further action. She says the committee has already reviewed my display in person and found it non-compliant. She says if I continue to argue, I will be subject to additional penalties for obstruction. I read that email 3 times. She is escalating. This is not about lights anymore. This is about control. I call Derek again. I tell him about the email. He is quiet for a second, and then he says Heather did the same thing to him 2 years ago over a fence stain color. He says she approved it, and then she changed her mind after a neighbor complained, and she threatened him with fines until he repainted the whole fence. He says the board backed her because they did not want the headache. He says my best move is to show up at the next board meeting with all my evidence and force them to go on record. He says the meeting is Monday night. That is 3 days away. My deadline is Sunday night. I ask him if he will come to the meeting as a witness. He says yes. Saturday morning I wake up to a new email. It is from the HOA management company, not from Heather. It is an attorney demand letter. It is copied to the entire board, and it is copied to Heather. It says I am in violation of Community Covenants, Section 4.7 and Section 6.2, which covers nuisance and disturbance. It says I must sign a compliance agreement by the end of the week, agreeing to remove the music sync controller and reduce the light display to static white or warm white only. It says if I do not sign, the HOA will pursue legal remedies including fines, liens, and injunctive relief. It says the HOA reserves the right to seek attorney fees. I read it twice, and my hands are shaking. This is insane. I followed every rule. I have the approval email. I have photos. I have receipts for every component. And now they are threatening to put a lien on my house over Christmas lights. I go to the front door and I open it. Heather is standing on my porch holding the laminated checklist and a clipboard. She is in the same maroon vest. She has a phone in her other hand, and the camera is pointing at me. She says she is here to perform a compliance inspection. I say I did not agree to an inspection. She says the covenants allow the Architectural Review Committee to inspect properties for violations at any reasonable time. I say this is not reasonable. It is Saturday morning and I have not had my coffee. She says she is noting my refusal to cooperate. I step outside and I close the door behind me. I say I am not refusing, I am asking what you are inspecting. She points at my roofline and she says the light display. I say you already saw it Thursday night. She says the committee requires updated documentation. She starts taking photos with her phone. I pull out my phone and I start recording video. She sees me and she says stop recording me. I say, you are recording me. She says this is official HOA business and recording board members is intimidation. I say I am documenting the inspection. She lowers her phone and she says she is going to recommend immediate enforcement action. She says the lights are a fire hazard and the sync controller is generating electromagnetic interference. I say that is not true. She says the board has reports. I say show me the reports. She says that is confidential. Stop arguing. She turns and she walks back to her car. I watch her drive away and I go back inside. I sit down at my kitchen table and I open my laptop and I pull up the HOA portal. I go to the violations section and I check my account. There is a new entry. Posted 20 minutes ago. Violation notice. Second offense. Failure to comply with architectural standards. Penalty $50 per day effective immediately. I click on the notice. The description says, resident refused to allow compliance inspection and continues to operate non-approved holiday display. That is a lie. I did not refuse the inspection. I stepped outside and I let her take photos. I screenshot the notice. I open my email and I forward the screenshot to Derek. I write, "She is making things up." He replies 2 minutes later, "Told you. Keep everything." I spend the rest of Saturday writing a formal appeal. I cite the original approval email. I cite the lack of specific violations. I cite the attorney demand letter and the compliance notice, and I point out the inconsistencies. The demand letter says I need to remove the music sync controller and reduce the lights to static white. The compliance notice says I refused an inspection. Neither one explains what is actually wrong. I attach photos of the display, photos of the controller, photos of the extension cords and outlets, and a copy of my original application. I submit the appeal through the portal. I get an auto reply saying appeals are reviewed at the next board meeting. The next board meeting is Monday night. My fine clock is already running. $50 a day. If they do not reverse it Monday, I am out $150 by the time they even look at it. Sunday afternoon, I get a notification on my phone. Someone posted in the neighborhood portal. I open it, and I see a thread titled, "Holiday Light Display on Maple Ridge Lowering Property Values." The post is anonymous, but the writing style is obvious. It says a resident is operating an excessive and garish light display that violates community standards and creates safety hazards. It says the display includes inflatable decorations and high-intensity strobe effects that are visible from the street and disturb neighbors. It says this kind of behavior is why our property values are at risk. The post has 6 comments. 3 of them agree. 2 of them say they have not noticed any problems. 1 of them says the lights are beautiful and the HOA is overreacting. I screenshot the thread. I noticed the post timestamp. It was posted at 2:17, right before a holiday weekend. This is selective enforcement. This is targeted. Heather approved my application, and now she is trying to bury me because someone complained, and she does not want to admit she made a mistake. I call Derek and I tell him about the portal post. He says Heather has done this before. He says she uses the portal to build a case for enforcement. He says once there is a public thread she can point to community complaints, and the board has cover to back her up. He asks if I have checked the edit history on the portal. I say, what edit history? He says the portal software tracks edits. He says if Heather posted the thread she might have edited it to add details after the fact. He tells me how to access it. I hang up and I go to my laptop. I log into the portal admin tools. I do not have admin access, but I have read access to public threads. I click on the post and I look for the edit log. There it is. The post was created at 2:17. It was edited at 4:32. I click on the edit diff. The original post said, "Resident on Maple Ridge has bright holiday lights." The edited version added, "Excessive and garish, inflatable decorations, high-intensity strobe effects, safety hazards, property values at risk." Heather rewrote it. She added all the loaded language after she posted it. I screenshot the edit history. I save it to a folder on my desktop labeled HOA Evidence. Monday morning, I get another email from the HOA attorney. It says the compliance agreement deadline has passed, and the HOA is proceeding with enforcement. It says I now have fines totaling $100, and the daily fine will continue until I remove the display or sign the agreement. It says if the fines exceed $500, the HOA will file a lien. I reply to the email, and I attach my appeal letter and all my evidence. I say I have submitted a formal appeal, and I expect the fines to be suspended pending the board meeting. The attorney replies and says the fines are automatic per the covenants, and appeals do not suspend enforcement. He says the board will review my appeal Monday night, but the fines stand regardless. I forward the email to Derek. He replies, "They are trying to bury you in fees, so you give up. Do not give up." I spend Monday afternoon preparing for the meeting. I print out every email. I print out the original approval. I print out the compliance notice and the demand letter and the attorney emails. I print out the portal post and the edit history. I print out the photos of my display and the photos of Heather taking photos on Saturday morning. I put everything in a 3-ring binder with tabs. I rehearse what I am going to say. I am going to walk in. I am going to state the facts. I am going to show the evidence, and I am going to ask for the fines to be reversed and the compliance notice to be withdrawn. I am not going to argue. I am not going to get emotional. I am going to be calm and professional, and I am going to let the evidence speak. Derek shows up at my house at 6:30. The meeting starts at 7. We drive over to the clubhouse together. He tells me the board is going to try to rush through the agenda and bury my appeal at the end. He says I need to ask to speak during the open forum at the beginning. He says once I am on record, the board cannot ignore it. We park and we walk into the clubhouse. The meeting room is set up with a long table at the front and folding chairs in rows. Heather is already there. She is sitting at the table with the laminated checklist in front of her. The board president is there, a guy named Tom in a blue polo. The treasurer is there, a woman named Linda. The secretary is there. The HOA attorney is sitting at the end of the table with a laptop open. There are maybe 12 other residents in the chairs. I recognize a few of them from the neighborhood. Derek and I sit in the second row. Tom calls the meeting to order at 7:03. He goes through the roll call and the approval of last month's minutes. Then he says we are moving to the open forum, and residents can speak for up to 3 minutes on any topic. I raise my hand. Tom sees me, and he says state your name and address. I stand up and I say my name, and I say I live at 412 Maple Ridge Court, and I am here to appeal a violation notice. Tom looks at Heather. Heather looks at the attorney. The attorney says appeals are heard under new business later in the agenda. I say I understand, but I want to provide context during the open forum so the board has the full picture. Tom says I have 3 minutes. I open my binder and I start talking. I say I submitted a holiday light display application on November 10th. I say it was approved on November 18th with no conditions. I say I installed the display in full compliance with the approval and with all applicable safety codes. I say on December 12th, the architectural review chair visited my property and issued a compliance notice demanding I resubmit photos within 72 hours. I say I resubmitted the photos and requested clarification on what was non-compliant. I say instead of clarification, I received an attorney demand letter threatening fines and liens. I say I have been assessed $100 in fines for a display that was approved and that meets all safety standards. I say I have documented evidence that the violation notice contains false statements and that the community portal post was edited after the fact to add inflammatory language. I hold up the binder. I say I have the original approval email. I have the compliance notice. I have the attorney letters. I have photos, and I have the portal edit history showing the post was rewritten. I say I am asking the board to reverse the fines, withdraw the violation notice, and clarify what, if anything, is actually non-compliant with my display. Tom says my 3 minutes are up. I sit down. Heather is staring at me. Her face is red. She leans over and she whispers something to Tom. Tom says we will address the appeal under new business. He moves on to the treasurer's report. Linda talks about the budget for 5 minutes. Then Tom moves to committee reports. Heather stands up and she says the Architectural Review Committee has processed 14 applications this month and issued 3 violation notices. She does not mention me by name, but she looks directly at me when she says some residents continue to disregard community standards despite repeated warnings. She sits down. The secretary gives a report about landscaping. Then Tom says we are moving to new business. He says the first item is an appeal of a violation notice for 412 Maple Ridge Court. He asks the attorney to summarize the issue. The attorney says the resident installed a holiday light display that was initially approved but subsequent complaints revealed safety and aesthetic violations. He says the resident was given an opportunity to come into compliance and refused. He says the HOA is within its rights to assess fines per the covenants. I raise my hand. Tom says I will have a chance to respond. He asks Heather to provide the committee's perspective. Heather stands up and she pulls out the laminated checklist. She says my display includes high-intensity strobe lighting, excessive inflatable decorations, and a music synchronization system that generates noise disturbances. She says the committee received multiple complaints from neighbors. She says I refused to cooperate with a compliance inspection on December 14th. She says the display is a fire hazard due to improper extension cord use. She sits down. I stand up. I say that is not accurate. I say I did not refuse the inspection. I stepped outside and allowed the chair to take photos. I say the display does not include strobe lighting. It includes synchronized color-changing LED strips that operate on a slow fade pattern. I say I have one inflatable decoration, a snowman, which is allowed per the guidelines. I say the music sync controller is inside my garage and does not produce external sound. I say I have submitted photos proving all of this. Tom says he has not seen the photos. I say I submitted them through the portal on Friday. The attorney clicks on his laptop and he says he does not see a submission. I pull out my phone and I open the portal app and I show him the submission confirmation. He looks at it and he says the submission went to the general inbox, not to the board review queue. He says that is a technical issue and it does not change the fact that the display is non-compliant. I say non-compliant based on what? Heather says based on the complaints. I say show me the complaints. She says that is confidential. I say if the complaints are the basis for the violation, I have a right to see them. The attorney says complaint details are confidential per board policy to protect residents from retaliation. If you appreciate deep dives into HOA drama, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories like this. I take a breath, and I say I have evidence that the complaint was fabricated. I pull out the printed screenshots of the portal edit history. I walk up to the table, and I hand them to Tom. I say the portal post accusing me of lowering property values was posted on December 15th at 2:17 and edited at 4:32. I say the original post said, "Resident on Maple Ridge has bright holiday lights." I say the edited version added the words excessive, garish, inflatable decorations, high-intensity strobe effects, safety hazards, and property values at risk. I say the edit was made by the same user who posted it. Tom looks at the screenshots. He looks at Heather. Heather says the edit was to provide additional detail based on further observation. I say the edit was made 2 hours after the original post, and it added details that do not match the actual display. I say this is evidence that the complaint is not based on objective facts, it is based on someone's subjective opinion, and it was retroactively inflated to justify enforcement. The attorney says the edit history does not prove the complaint is false, it shows the complaint was clarified. I say if the complaint needed clarification, maybe it was not a valid complaint to begin with. Tom says we are getting off track. He says the issue is whether the display complies with the covenants. I say the display was approved on November 18th and nothing has changed since then. Heather says the approval was conditional. I say show me the conditions. She does not answer. I say I have the approval email right here and it says approved with no conditions. I pull it out of the binder and I hand it to Tom. He reads it. He looks at Heather. He says this says approved, no conditions. Heather says the conditions were implied based on the standard guidelines. I say implied is not the same as stated. I say if there were conditions, they should have been in the approval email. Tom looks at the attorney. The attorney says the board has discretion to revoke approvals if new information comes to light. I say, what new information? He says complaints from neighbors. I say I want to see the complaints. He says they are confidential. I say, then how do I know they are legitimate? He says the board does not have to prove the legitimacy of complaints to enforce the covenants. I say that is not due process. He says HOA enforcement is not a court of law, and due process does not apply the same way. I feel my pulse in my temples. I look at Derek. He nods. I say I have more evidence. I pull out my phone and I open the doorbell camera app. I say I have video footage from December 12th, showing the architectural review chair arriving at my property at 7:41 in the evening, without prior notice, and demanding I turn off my lights. I say the footage shows her stating the display is non-compliant but refusing to specify what is non-compliant. I say it shows her threatening to call the police. Tom says we do not need to watch video. I say I think you do. I walk up to the table and I place my phone on the surface facing the board. I press play. The video is from my doorbell camera. It is a wide-angle view of my front porch and driveway. The timestamp says December 12th, 7:41. Heather's white sedan pulls up to the curb. She gets out. She is holding the laminated checklist. She walks up my driveway and she rings the doorbell. I answer. The audio is clear. She says I need to turn off the lights right now, or she is calling the police. I say, what is the problem? She says the music sync setup is a noise violation. I say, what noise? She says stop arguing. I say I submitted an application and it was approved. She says that is not compliant, you do not get an exception. I say I am not asking for an exception. I followed the rules. She says stop arguing. The video shows her handing me the compliance notice. It shows me taking photos of the notice. It shows her saying recording board members is harassment. It shows her getting back in her car and driving away. The video ends. Tom looks at Heather. Heather says the video does not show anything improper. I say it shows you threatening to call the police over a noise violation that does not exist. She says I was enforcing the covenants. I say you were harassing me. She says that is not true. The attorney says doorbell footage is not admissible evidence in an HOA proceeding because it was not disclosed in advance. I say I am disclosing it now. He says the board policy requires evidence to be submitted 72 hours before the meeting. I say I submitted my appeal 72 hours ago, and you said it did not go to the right queue. He says that is a separate issue. I say you are inventing technicalities to avoid addressing the facts. Tom says, let's keep this civil. I say I am being civil, but I am being stonewalled. I have proof that I followed the rules, proof that the violation notice is based on false claims, proof that the portal post was edited to inflate the complaint, and proof that the architectural review chair showed up at my house and threatened me without cause. I say I am asking the board to do the right thing and reverse the fines and withdraw the notice. Tom looks at Heather. Heather looks at the attorney. The attorney says the board needs to deliberate. Tom says we will take a 5-minute recess and reconvene to vote. He stands up. The board stands up. Heather grabs the laminated checklist and she walks out of the room. The attorney follows her. Derek leans over, and he says that went well. I say it did not feel like it went well. He says you got everything on record and now they have to respond. We wait. The other residents in the room are talking quietly. A couple of them come over and they say they think the HOA is out of line. One of them says she had a similar issue last year with a fence, and Heather made her life hell for 3 months. She says she ended up giving in because she could not afford the legal fight. I thank her. 5 minutes turns into 15. Finally, Tom and the board come back in. They sit down. Tom says the board has reviewed the evidence and we have decided to table the appeal pending further investigation. I say, what does that mean? He says we need time to review the documentation and consult with legal counsel. I say the fines are accruing daily. He says the fines will continue until the matter is resolved. I say that is not fair. Heather says stop arguing. I turn to her and I say, you keep saying that, but I am not arguing, I am presenting facts. She says you are being confrontational and disrespectful. I say I am being neither, I am defending myself against false accusations. Tom says the decision is final and the meeting is adjourned. He bangs a gavel. The board stands up and they start packing up their materials. Derek and I walk out to the parking lot. I am shaking. Derek says they are stalling because they know they are wrong, but they do not want to admit it in front of everyone. He says the attorney is probably advising them to drag it out until I give up. I say, I am not giving up. He says good, because you have them cornered. He says the edit history is the smoking gun. He says if you push hard enough they will have to back down. I ask him what I should do next. He says file a complaint with the management company and demand they suspend the fines pending the investigation. He says copy the attorney on everything so they know you are not going away. I thank him, and I drive home. Tuesday morning I wake up to another email from the management company. It is a reminder that my fines are now at $150 and I have until Friday to sign the compliance agreement or the amount will increase to $250. I reply and I attach a PDF of everything I presented at the meeting. I write, I am formally requesting that fines be suspended pending the board's investigation as stated in the December 16th meeting. I am also requesting a written explanation of what specifically is non-compliant with my display, given that it was approved on November 18th, with no conditions. I send the email. I get an auto reply. I forward the email to Derek. He replies, keep the pressure on. Wednesday I get a call from the HOA attorney. He says the board has completed its investigation and determined that the fines are valid. He says the display violates Section 4.7 due to excessive brightness and Section 6.2 due to neighbor complaints. I say excessive brightness is subjective and neighbor complaints are not a violation. He says the covenants give the board discretion to determine what constitutes excessive. I say discretion is not the same as arbitrary. He says the board's decision is final unless I want to pursue arbitration. I ask what arbitration costs. He says typically $1,500 to $3,000. I say that is more than the fines. He says that is correct. I say this is extortion. He says it is enforcement. I hang up. I sit at my kitchen table and I stare at my laptop. My timer window closes in 1 hour. That is the deadline for removing my display before the next fine increment. I have a choice. I can take down the lights and sign the agreement and pay the fines and move on. Or I can keep fighting and risk more fees and more legal bills and more sleepless nights. I think about the stakes, my peace of mind, my mortgage, my truck payments. I cannot afford to lose this fight financially, but I cannot afford to give in morally. I think about what Derek said. You have them cornered. I think about the edit history and the doorbell footage and the approval email. I think about Heather standing in my driveway saying, "Stop arguing." I think about the attorney saying due process does not apply. I open my laptop and I pull up the evidence folder. I look at the portal edit history. I look at the doorbell video. I look at the approval email. And then I see something I did not notice before. The approval email is dated November 18th. The compliance notice is dated December 12th. But the attorney demand letter references Section 6.2, which covers nuisance and disturbance. I pull up the covenant's PDF. I search for Section 6.2. It says, any activity that generates sustained noise, odor, or visual disturbance as determined by the board may be deemed a nuisance and subject to enforcement. The key word is sustained. My lights are on a timer. They shut off at 10. That is not sustained. I keep reading. Section 6.2 also says, before issuing a violation notice for nuisance, the board must provide written notice of the complaint and allow the resident 14 days to respond. I never got written notice of a complaint. The first I heard of it was the compliance notice on December 12th, which gave me 72 hours, not 14 days. The HOA violated its own procedure. I screenshot the relevant section of the covenants. I open a new email to the attorney and I copy the board. I write, I have reviewed the covenants and I have identified a procedural violation. Section 6.2 requires written notice of a nuisance complaint and 14 days to respond before a violation notice can be issued. I received no written notice and I was given 72 hours. The compliance notice issued on December 12th is invalid. I request that all fines be immediately reversed and the violation notice be withdrawn. I attach the screenshot. I send the email. I wait. 10 minutes later, the attorney replies. He says the 14-day notice requirement applies to sustained nuisances, not to immediate safety hazards. He says the committee determined my display was an immediate safety hazard due to improper electrical use. I reply, the display uses outdoor rated extension cords plugged into GFCI outlets. There is no safety hazard. Provide documentation of the alleged hazard. He does not reply. I call Derek and I tell him what I found. He says the HOA is making it up as they go. He says they are hoping you do not read the covenants. He says you need to force them into a corner where they have to either admit they violated procedure or provide proof of the safety hazard. I say how. He says file a formal complaint with the state. I say what state agency? He says North Carolina has a homeowner association ombudsman. He says you can file a complaint online and they will investigate. He says it does not cost anything, and it puts the HOA on notice that you are serious. I thank him and I hang up. I Google North Carolina HOA ombudsman. I find the website. I fill out the complaint form. I attach the approval email, the compliance notice, the attorney letters, the portal edit history, the doorbell video, and the covenants excerpt. I submit it. I get a confirmation email saying the complaint will be reviewed within 30 days. Thursday morning I get a text from Derek. He says Heather is at it again. He sends me a screenshot of a new portal post. The post is titled, Reminder, Holiday Display Deadlines. It says all holiday decorations must be removed by January 5th per community standards. It says residents who fail to comply will be subject to fines. The post is signed by the Architectural Review Committee. I check the date. It is December 19th. January 5th is 2.5 weeks away. That is earlier than the standard deadline, which is usually mid-January. I go to the covenants PDF and I search for holiday decoration deadlines. Section 4.7 says decorations must be removed within a reasonable time after the holiday. It does not specify a date. The Community Guidelines Addendum says January 15th, not January 5th. Heather is making up a new deadline. I screenshot the post and the covenants section and I email them to the attorney. I write, the portal post states a January 5th removal deadline. The covenants and guidelines specify January 15th. Please clarify which deadline applies. The attorney replies, the board has discretion to set reasonable deadlines based on community standards. January 5th is reasonable. I reply, reasonable based on what? The guidelines say January 15th. Changing the deadline without notice is arbitrary. He replies, the board may update guidelines at any time. I reply, updates require board approval and resident notice per the bylaws. Was this update approved? He does not reply. I open the portal and I go to the board meeting minutes. I search for any mention of a January 5th deadline. There is nothing. I search the guidelines archive. The most recent version is dated September, and it says January 15th. Heather posted a new deadline without board approval. I screenshot the minutes and the guidelines. I forward them to Derek. He replies, she is out of control. I reply, what do I do? He replies, show up at the next meeting and call her out. I say the next meeting is January 13th. He says file an emergency appeal. I say how? He says the bylaws allow any resident to request an emergency meeting if 5% of homeowners sign a petition. I say how many homeowners is that? He says Willowbrook has 212 homes, so you need 11 signatures. I say I do not know 11 people. He says I know 11 people. Give me an hour. Derek texts me 90 minutes later. He says he has 13 signatures. He says he is emailing the petition to the management company and the board. He says the bylaws require the board to schedule the meeting within 10 days. I thank him. I wait. Friday morning I get an email from Tom, the board president. He says the board has received the petition and we are scheduling an emergency meeting for December 23rd at 7 in the evening. He says the meeting will address concerns about enforcement procedures and holiday decoration guidelines. I reply, and I say I will be there. Derek texts me and says he will be there too. Friday afternoon I get another email from the attorney. It says my fines are now at $200 and the compliance agreement deadline has passed. It says the HOA is proceeding with a lien filing unless I pay the fines or remove the display by December 22nd. I reply, and I say I am not paying fines that are based on invalid procedures, and I am not removing a display that was approved. I say I will see the board at the emergency meeting. He replies, the lien process is independent of the meeting. I reply, file the lien, and I will sue for wrongful enforcement. He does not reply. Saturday, I spend the day preparing for the meeting. I print new copies of everything. I organize the binder with tabs for each section: original approval, compliance notice, attorney letters, portal edit history, doorbell video stills, covenants excerpts, guidelines archive, meeting minutes, ombudsman complaint confirmation. I rehearse my presentation. I am going to walk in, and I am going to present a timeline. November 10th, application submitted. November 18th, application approved with no conditions. December 9th, Anonymous complaint forwarded. December 12th. Compliance notice issued with 72 hours, violating the 14-day requirement in Section 6.2. December 15th. Portal post edited to add inflammatory language. December 16th. Board meeting. Appeal tabled. December 19th. New January 5th deadline posted without board approval. December 20th. Lien threat issued. I am going to show how every step was procedurally invalid and how Heather has been changing the rules to justify enforcement. Sunday, I drive past Heather's house. She lives 4 blocks over in the same neighborhood. Her house has no holiday lights, no decorations, nothing. I take a photo. Monday, I get a text from a neighbor I do not know. The text says, "I signed Derek's petition. I saw your lights. They are beautiful. The HOA is harassing you. Good luck at the meeting." I reply, "Thank you." Tuesday, I get 2 more texts from neighbors saying the same thing. I am starting to realize I am not alone. Wednesday, December 23rd, I arrive at the clubhouse at 6:45. The parking lot is full. I walk inside and the meeting room is packed. There are at least 40 residents. Derek is in the front row. He saved me a seat. I sit down. The board is already at the table. Tom, Heather, Linda, the secretary, and the attorney. Heather has the laminated checklist in front of her. Tom calls the meeting to order at 7:02. He says this is an emergency meeting called by resident petition to address enforcement procedures and holiday decoration guidelines. He says the board will hear public comment and then the board will deliberate and vote on any necessary actions. He opens the floor. I stand up. I state my name and address. I say I am here because the Architectural Review Committee has violated its own procedures multiple times in the enforcement of a holiday light display violation. I walk up to the table and I hand Tom a copy of my binder. I hand a copy to Heather. I hand a copy to the attorney. I say I have organized the evidence chronologically and I am going to walk through it step by step. Tom says proceed. I open the binder to the first tab. I say on November 10th, I submitted an application for a holiday light display. On November 18th, the application was approved by the Architectural Review Chair with no conditions. I show the email. I say on December 12th, 24 days later, the chair arrived at my property without notice and issued a compliance notice demanding I resubmit photos within 72 hours or face fines. I show the notice. I say the notice did not specify what was non-compliant. I resubmitted photos and requested clarification. Instead of clarification, I received an attorney demand letter threatening liens. I show the letter. I flip to the next tab. I say the demand letter references Section 6.2, which requires written notice of a complaint and 14 days to respond before a violation notice can be issued. I received no written notice and I was given 72 hours. The procedure was violated. I show the covenants excerpt. I flip to the next tab. I say on December 15th, an anonymous portal post accused me of lowering property values. The post was edited 2 hours after it was posted to add inflammatory language that does not match the actual display. I show the edit history. I say the edit proves the complaint was not based on objective observation, it was retroactively inflated to justify enforcement. I flip to the next tab. I say on December 19th, the Architectural Review Committee posted a new deadline requiring all decorations to be removed by January 5th. The community guidelines specify January 15th. The new deadline was not approved by the board and violates the bylaw's requirement for resident notice. I show the guidelines and the meeting minutes. I close the binder, and I say I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for the rules to be applied fairly and consistently. I followed every step of the application process. I was approved. And then the rules were changed after the fact to justify enforcement. I say I have filed a complaint with the state ombudsman, and I am prepared to pursue legal action if necessary. But I would prefer to resolve this tonight by having the board reverse the fines, withdraw the violation notice, and clarify that the January 15th deadline applies per the existing guidelines. I sit down. The room is silent. Tom looks at Heather. Heather is staring at me. Her face is red. She stands up. She says everything I just said is a mischaracterization. She says the approval was conditional based on standard safety and aesthetic expectations. She says I violated those expectations by installing a display that is excessive and garish. She says the complaints are legitimate and confidential. She says the 14-day notice requirement does not apply because the display was an immediate safety hazard. She says the January 5th deadline is reasonable and within the board's discretion. She sits down. I stand up. I say, show me the conditions. Show me the safety hazard. Show me the board approval for the new deadline. Heather says, stop arguing. The room erupts. A dozen residents start talking at once. Someone yells, let him talk. Someone else yells, she is always doing this. Tom bangs the gavel and says order. The room quiets down. Tom says the board needs to review the evidence and deliberate. A resident in the back yells, you have the evidence right there. Another resident yells, this is ridiculous. Tom bangs the gavel again. He says, we are going to take a recess and the board will reconvene in 15 minutes to vote. The board stands up and walks out. The attorney grabs his laptop and follows them. Derek leans over and says, you destroyed her. I say it does not feel like it. He says, wait. The residents around us are talking. Several of them come over and they say they have had similar problems with Heather. One of them says she threatened him with fines over a mailbox color. Another says she made her repaint her shutters twice because the color was not pre-approved even though it matched the guidelines. A third says she rejected his fence application 3 times for reasons that kept changing. I am starting to see the pattern. This is not about my lights. This is about Heather using the rules to control people. 15 minutes turns into 30. Finally, the board comes back in. They sit down. Tom says the board has reviewed the evidence and we have made several decisions. First, the fines assessed against 412 Maple Ridge Court are suspended pending further review. Second, the compliance notice dated December 12th is withdrawn. Third, the holiday decoration removal deadline is clarified as January 15th per the existing guidelines. Fourth, the Architectural Review Committee will implement a new procedure requiring all violation notices to include specific citations and photographic evidence. Fifth, the board is directing the management company to conduct a full audit of enforcement actions over the past 12 months to identify any procedural inconsistencies. He looks at me. He says the board apologizes for the confusion and we appreciate you bringing these issues to our attention. The room breaks into applause. I sit down. I feel my shoulders drop. Derek pats me on the back. Heather is staring at the table. She does not look up. Tom says the meeting is adjourned. The board stands up. Heather grabs the laminated checklist and she walks out without saying anything. The attorney packs his laptop and leaves. Residents come over and shake my hand. One of them says, "You just saved us all a lot of headaches." Another says, "Thank you for standing up to her." Derek says, "Let's get out of here." We walk to the parking lot. I feel lighter than I have felt in 2 weeks. Thursday morning, I wake up to an email from the HOA attorney. It says the board has directed the management company to issue a formal retraction of the violation notice and a refund of the suspended fines. It says the retraction letter will be mailed within 5 business days. I reply, "Thank you." I forward the email to Derek. He replies, "Told you." Friday, I get another email from Tom. He says the board has accepted Heather's resignation from the Architectural Review Committee effective immediately. He says the board is forming a new committee with updated procedures, and he invites any interested residents to apply. I do not reply. I am done with HOA politics. Saturday, I go outside and I check my lights. They are still running perfectly. Synchronized color fades, no strobes, timer set for 10. I stand in my driveway and I look at the display and I feel good. Sunday, I get a knock on my door. I open it and it is the neighbor who texted me earlier in the week. She says she just wanted to say thank you again. She says Heather has been terrorizing this neighborhood for 3 years and nobody had the guts to stand up to her. She says you did everyone a favor. I say I just wanted to keep my lights up. She laughs and says, "Well, you did that, and you took down a tyrant." Merry Christmas. I say Merry Christmas. Monday, December 29th, I get a letter in the mail from the management company. It is the formal retraction. It says the violation notice dated December 12th is hereby withdrawn, and all associated fines are reversed. It says the Architectural Review Committee has updated its procedures to ensure fair and consistent enforcement. It says the board regrets any inconvenience. I scan the letter and I save it to my evidence folder. Tuesday, I get a call from the state ombudsman. They say they received my complaint and they have contacted the HOA for a response. They say based on the evidence I provided and the board's subsequent actions, they are closing the complaint as resolved. They say if I have any further issues, I can reopen it. I thank them and hang up. Wednesday, New Year's Eve, I am sitting on my couch watching my lights cycle through the colors, and I get a text from Derek. He says Heather is moving. I say what? He says she listed her house yesterday and she is relocating to another neighborhood. He says word is the board told her to step down or they would vote her out, and she chose to leave instead. I text back, "Wow." He texts, "Karma." I text, "Yeah." Thursday, New Year's Day, I take down the inflatable snowman and I pack it in the garage. I leave the lights up. They are staying until January 15th. Friday, January 2nd, I get an email from a new Architectural Review Committee member introducing herself. She says the committee is implementing the updated procedures and she wants to thank me for helping improve the process. She says if I have any feedback or suggestions, she would welcome them. I reply, and I say I appreciate the outreach and I am happy to help if needed. Saturday, I go for a walk around the neighborhood. I see other houses with lights still up. I see decorations. I see inflatables. Nobody is getting violation notices. The neighborhood feels different. Lighter. Sunday, January 5th, the old deadline Heather tried to impose. I check the portal. There are no new posts about decorations. No reminders. No threats. Monday, January 13th, I attend the regular board meeting. Tom announces that the enforcement audit is complete and the board has identified 12 cases over the past year where procedures were not followed. He says the board is issuing formal apologies and refunds to the affected residents. He says the new Architectural Review Committee is committed to transparency and fairness. He does not mention Heather by name, but everyone knows who he is talking about. Tuesday, I get a thank you card in the mail from one of the residents who was affected by the audit. It says, "You gave us our voice back. Thank you." Wednesday, January 15th, I take down the lights. I coil the extension cords. I pack the light strips in labeled bins. I store the controller in the garage. I stand in my driveway and I look at my house, and it looks normal again. But I do not feel normal. I feel like I won something bigger than a fight over Christmas lights. I feel like I proved that the rules matter, and that people who abuse the rules can be stopped. Thursday, I get a final email from the HOA attorney. It says the board has officially closed my case and no further action is required. It says the board thanks me for my patience and cooperation. I delete the email. I am done. Friday, January 17th, Derek texts me and says he is running for the board in the next election. He says he wants to make sure what happened to me does not happen to anyone else. I text back, "You have my vote." He texts, "I am going to need more than that. Will you help me campaign?" I text, "Yeah." Saturday, I sit down with Derek and we start planning. We talk about transparency. We talk about fairness. We talk about making sure the rules are applied consistently and that residents have a voice. We talk about holding the board accountable. Sunday, we start knocking on doors. We talk to neighbors. We listen to their stories. A lot of them have stories about Heather. A lot of them have stories about other board members who looked the other way. A lot of them are ready for change. Monday, January 20th, I go back to work. I am estimating a commercial project in Uptown Charlotte. I am sitting in a conference room with blueprints spread out on the table and my phone buzzes. It is a text from a neighbor I have never met. It says, "I heard what you did with the HOA. I am dealing with something similar. Can I ask you some questions?" I text back, "Sure." We set up a call for that evening. I spend an hour on the phone walking her through the process. I tell her to document everything. I tell her to read the covenants. I tell her to get copies of every email and every notice. I tell her to find an ally. I tell her not to give up. She thanks me and says she feels better. I hang up and I realize this is not over. This is just the beginning. Tuesday, I get another call. Wednesday, I get 2 more. By the end of the week, I have talked to 6 residents in Willowbrook and 3 residents in other neighborhoods who are dealing with HOA overreach. I start a shared document with tips and resources. I send it to everyone who asks. Derek says I should start a blog. I say maybe. Thursday, January 30th, the board sends out a community-wide email announcing the new Architectural Review Committee members and the updated enforcement procedures. The email includes a link to a FAQ page explaining resident rights and the appeals process. It includes a commitment to transparency and accountability. I read it and I feel a little bit of pride. This is what I fought for. Friday, January 31st. I am sitting in my living room and I get a notification on my phone. Someone left a review on the neighborhood portal. The review is for Willowbrook Estates. 5 stars. The comment says, "This neighborhood is finally getting its act together. The HOA is listening to residents, and the new committee is fair and professional. If you are looking for a place with good amenities and reasonable rules, this is it." I smile. Saturday, February 1st, I drive past Heather's old house. There is a sold sign in the yard. I do not know where she went, and I do not care. I just know she is not here anymore, and the neighborhood is better for it. Sunday, February 2nd, I am cleaning out my garage and I find the laminated holiday display checklist. Heather must have dropped it in my driveway that first night, and I picked it up without realizing it. I look at it. It is a printed sheet with a list of rules. Lights must be white or warm white only. No inflatables over 4 feet. No animated displays. No music or sound. Extension cords must be hidden. Decorations must be removed by January 5th. Half of these rules are not in the covenants. Half of them are not in the guidelines. Heather made them up. I take a photo of the checklist and I text it to Derek. He texts back, "That is insane." I text, "Yeah." He texts, "You should frame it." I text, "Maybe I will." Monday, February 3rd, I go to a framing shop and I have the checklist professionally mounted. I hang it in my home office as a reminder. A reminder that rules are only as good as the people who enforce them. A reminder that standing up for yourself matters. A reminder that documentation wins. Tuesday, February 4th, I get an email from Tom. He says the board election is scheduled for March 15th, and he encourages all residents to vote. He says Derek is running for a seat, and there are 3 other candidates. He says the board is committed to a fair and transparent election process. I reply, and I say I will be there. Wednesday, February 5th, I sit down and I write this whole story out. I write it for myself. I write it so I do not forget. I write it so that if anyone else goes through this, they know they are not alone. I write it because I want people to understand that HOAs are not untouchable and that residents have rights. I finish writing and I save the document. Thursday, February 6th, I send the document to Derek. He reads it and he calls me. He says this is powerful. He says I should share it. I say I do not know. He says people need to hear this. I say maybe. Friday, February 7th, I think about it. I think about all the neighbors who reached out. I think about all the people who are dealing with the same thing. I think about Heather and the laminated checklist and the violation notices and the attorney letters. I think about the doorbell footage and the edit history and the moment I realized I had the proof. And I decide to share it. Saturday, February 8th, I post the story on a community forum. I post it on a Reddit thread about HOA horror stories. I post it on a blog about homeowner rights. Within 24 hours, it has been read by thousands of people. The comments pour in. People say thank you for sharing. People say this happened to me. People say you gave me hope. People say I am going to fight back now. Sunday, February 9th, a local news reporter contacts me. She says she wants to do a story about HOA reform and she wants to interview me. I say yes. Monday, February 10th, the interview airs. It is a 3-minute segment on the evening news. They show my house. They show the lights. They show the violation notice. They show me talking about documentation and resident rights. They interview Derek. They interview Tom. They interview the ombudsman. The segment ends with the reporter saying, "One man's fight for his Christmas lights became a fight for fairness, and it is changing the way this HOA does business." Tuesday, February 11th, I get a call from another HOA in Charlotte. They want to know if I will consult on updating their enforcement procedures. I say I am not a lawyer. They say we do not need a lawyer. We need someone who understands what residents go through. I say I will think about it. Wednesday, February 12th, I get 2 more calls. Thursday, I get 3. By the end of the week, I have requests from 8 HOAs. I talk to Derek and he says you started something. I say I just wanted to keep my lights up. He says you did a lot more than that. Friday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, I get a card in the mail. It is from the neighbor who thanked me after the emergency meeting. The card says, "You reminded us that we have power. Thank you." I put the card on my fridge. Saturday, February 15th, I take my first consulting call. I spend an hour on Zoom with an HOA board in South Charlotte, walking them through best practices for enforcement. I talk about documentation. I talk about transparency. I talk about giving residents a voice. They thank me and they ask if I will come to their next meeting. I say yes. Sunday, February 16th. I realize this is my life now. I am the guy who fought the HOA and won. I am the guy people call when they need help. I am okay with that. Monday, March 15th, Election Day, I vote for Derek. Tuesday, March 16th, the results are announced. Derek wins by a landslide. He calls me and he says we did it. I say you did it. He says we both did it. Wednesday, March 17th, Derek is sworn in at the board meeting. He gives a short speech about fairness and accountability and listening to residents. The room applauds. I am sitting in the front row and I feel good. Thursday, March 18th, Derek schedules his first committee meeting. He invites me to attend as a community advisor. I say yes. Friday, March 19th, I drive home from work and I see my house and I think about everything that happened. I think about Heather standing in my driveway with the laminated checklist. I think about the compliance notice and the attorney letters and the fines. I think about the edit history and the doorbell footage and the moment I walked into that emergency meeting with a binder full of proof. I think about the board voting to suspend the fines and withdraw the notice. I think about Heather resigning. I think about the neighbors who reached out and the residents who said thank you. I think about Derek winning his seat. I think about the consulting calls and the news interview and the story going viral. And I think about the fact that none of this would have happened if I had just given up and taken down my lights. I park in my driveway, and I get out of my truck, and I stand there for a minute looking at my house. It is March. There are no lights, no decorations, just a normal house on a normal street in a normal neighborhood. But it does not feel normal. It feels like a victory. It feels like proof that standing up for yourself works. It feels like the beginning of something bigger. I walk inside and I sit down at my kitchen table, and I open my laptop and I check my email. There are 4 new messages from residents asking for help. I reply to each one. I tell them the same thing I told the others. Document everything. Read the rules. Find an ally. Do not give up. And I mean it. Because if I can win, anyone can win. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.